June of 2006.
Correct.
We were living in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. We were business owners, part of a church plant there. And one Sunday, we were in a worship experience, and I was a guest speaker. And the title of his message was As You Wish. And as we're sitting there listening to this message, God spoke very clearly to you. After 2 or 3 weeks of you just wrestling with what God had called you to do and what God was calling us as a family to do, you're in your office typing an email out, and as I walked by, I just stopped and said, okay, I need to know what's going on, because you've been emotional, you've been really wrestling. I can tell you're really wrestling, and I need to know what we're doing. And in that moment, you said, I am emailing our business partner, and I'm telling him that we are stepping away from our business and
Starting a church.
Yes. We spent the next several months looking at what church planning was. How does that happen? What do you do?
When I found out, I was a freshman in high school, and they initially told me that we would be moving back to Florida the summer after my freshman year of high school. But then they came back and said, just kidding, we're actually going to be moving over Christmas break. So we moved halfway through my freshman year of high school.
I was in 4th grade, so all of my grandparents lived here, so I was excited to be back with family.
Started talking to friends and who had become de-churched, people who had never been to church, and just invited them to be a part of it.
He calls me one day and says, hey, I'm gonna come back to Fernandina and start a church. And I said, do what? And he said, yeah, I'm gonna start a church, and I want you to get involved with me. So when I get back, and I said, okay.
He called me up, and said, I'm coming back home to plant a church.
We just, we really didn't know exactly what we were getting into, but we just, it just felt different.
Finding a building was crazy, because at first we couldn't find anything that was in our price range. It was either too big or too small. We had looked at the old Kmart and made several phone calls and could never get a return call. And then a friend of ours, Sean Taylor, ran into the real estate agent at a Christmas party.
So I knew that he was there. So that's when I approached him and said, hey man, look, we've been trying to get a hold of you. We're really interested in the building.
He called me, and gosh, 2 or 3 days later, we were walking through the building. It was incredible. He said, so what business are you doing? It's not a business. What is it? It's a church. Oh, how many people do you have? 13. And he said, oh, wow, you have big dreams. I said, we've got a big guy. He said, the building's been empty for 2 years. Make an offer. And I said, it's going to be a lot less than what you're asking. And he said, all he can do is say no. And so we made an offer, and lo and behold, a day or two later, he called and said he agreed to the price.
And then the repairs started and the preparation started, because then it got real.
It got real.
Yeah.
Like, we had a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
And we only had a handful of people doing it.
I mean, you really had guys there that was not carpenters or nothing, that actually God allowed us to, build.
For me, it was like just seeing it transform into a church from a gym that I had worked in for years was amazing.
Well, to go from a living room to having 8,000 square feet, and that was just a miracle. It didn't come without some roadblocks.
Right.
Because we had signed the lease, thought, man, we got this incredible space, and then come to find out that building wasn't zoned for a church, and so you had to get conditional use. to become a church, and that turned into a county meeting. And
Well, what's really interesting about that story is part of the pushback was we were opening a church within 1,000
1,000
feet of an establishment that sold alcohol, and there was a county ordinance that did not allow that. Someone else in the community filed a complaint, and going to the county just a few weeks before we were set to open, it posed the question, what defines a church? Because the ordinance meant a standalone building. And so we really got to push the reality that the church is not a building. And it was cool to see God work in that moment.
the building was not ready, and we worked till midnight to get it ready. I was still preparing the message, and it was just a culmination of so many emotions. Just knowing that, man, tomorrow's the day that all this comes to fruition, that we're gonna see the beginning of something that God planted when I was 22 years old.
For me, it was uncertainty, in not knowing who would walk through our doors. And I so vividly remember, I think one of the last things I did was somebody was helping me put together furniture in the nursery, and we were putting together all this stuff in the kids area. And you're working, and then walking out the door that night and just thinking, who is gonna walk through these doors? And then standing there on that Sunday morning and people just filing in.
I was really surprised at how, I don't want to say how many people we had, but just the people coming through the doors that I've been living here my whole life that I did not know.
Just
It's finally here.
yeah, interesting to see what's going to happen. I guess what God's going to do.
That first Sunday was amazing. I mean, it was Easter, so that in itself is the biggest day in the life of any church. So 165 people show up. 9 people give their life to Christ. Then the next day comes, and you're preparing for the next Sunday,
Right.
And then the next Sunday, and the next Sunday. And I don't know, I felt like I was finally where God had placed me. And so I didn't know what I was doing. I'd never pastored a church before, but at the same time, I still felt like I'm right exactly where God wants me.
For the first few months after the doors opened, I just kind of was present at church. I came, but I didn't really want to be here. I didn't want to be a part of it because I was mad. And I remember one Sunday, I was sitting in the back just during worship, and we were doing cardboard testimonies, and people were walking across, sharing kind of what God had done in their lives since they've been at the journey. And I just remember sitting there, and it wasn't like the audible voice of God, but I just, like, God kind of put something into my heart, and he was just kind of like, Katie, do you see what I'm doing here? Are you going to keep sitting back here with your arms crossed and not be a part of it? Or do you want to be a part of this? And I was like, okay.
Church was 6 months old, and I really wanted to get our people to Catalyst in Atlanta.
Which was a church conference.
Yeah, church conference, Andy Stanley. And so we went, and for me, what stands out is Francis Chan, who spoke, because he just made the statement that it's the church's responsibility to make sure that the poor is taken care of. It's not the government's responsibility. And he read that scripture from Proverbs 21:13. If any man hears the cry of the poor and does nothing, he too will cry out and not be heard. Greg, on the way back, said, man, what's wrong?
Because you're not usually quiet.
I said, man, I'm still taking in what Francis said, and our responsibility as a church. He said, well, what are we going to do about it? And I said, you know what? We're going to go home and we're going to take $10,000 out of our checking account and give $100 gift cards to people in our community. He said, man, can we afford it? I said, no, but God says to do it, so let's do it.
I think the most memorable outreach for me was when we went into neighborhoods on the island and we handed out gift cards for people to buy groceries.
Yeah.
Because I just saw how people were so shocked and like crying, and I was just overwhelmed by that.
We went home, and I was sitting in my office at the time and just celebrating, really, what we'd done. And God just spoke to my spirit and said, hey, it's amazing what you did today, but you had the resources to do that. Do you trust me? And I said, God, I trust you. And he said, make sure not one child in Nassau County goes without Christmas. And that was all that he said, really, in my spirit. I didn't know what that looked like. And I just came to the staff and said, hey, here's what I feel like God's telling us. If we could pull this off, if God's going to be God, what would that look like?
So we just sat down and just kind of made a list of what we would give to each child, an outfit, shoes, a gift, and a meal for the family, and tallied that up and came up with this, what seemed like an astronomical, impossible number. But you went back to the church that Sunday and just said, here's what we want to do. And it's going to take all of us doing our part. And God's people stepped up. And we took up an offering. And it was going to be, it was like $120,000.
$120,000 to pull it off. And in one day, with 200 and something people, we raised $119,700 and something. I mean, it was crazy.
And I just was blown away at the generosity of people who gave to be able to do, to give the bikes and the shoes. I mean,
You just saw God all over it, because it was so hard to pull off, because we raised so much money in a short period of time. He just asked the church to get involved, and they did.
You just can't forget the looks and the smiles and their faces.
To me, it was very exciting to see the parents enjoy the kids.
Yeah, I think just that call to care for the poor, I don't think we knew it on Christmas of 2007 what that would look like long term, but it was just something that God planted in your heart that would not go away. And so we just began to, how can we meet needs in our community? And brought in a semi-tractor trailer full of food a couple times a year and would just distribute it in the parking lot, built that relationship. And then Pete Foster volunteered to drive over once a week and load his pickup truck with food and come back, and we would distribute that. And we did that for a really long time, and turned our back storage area into a makeshift pantry and storage place for whatever he brought back.
Man, it's just morphed into what it is today. God's hand just touched it, and it went from one truck to two trucks. And, as we built this location here, and then built the outreach center, the amount of team members that come and give of their time, it's incredible. Serving now over 700 to 800 families per week.
And we've never run out of food. We've never had to turn anyone away. It's one of those miracles that you can take for granted if you're not careful, but he always provides.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, this right here is the auditorium.
I just think about all the staff that has been a part of the journey and how God used them in their season while they were here.
Absolutely.
You know, some were here for a year, some for 4 years, some for longer. Some are still with us. And so, but God used all of them.
No, I think it's important to remember. I think God's word tells us to remember because it reminds us of his faithfulness so that we stay the course. And so this has been really awesome to look back and to remember because we're forgetful people, and to be able to think back on those moments and reflect on all of that, I think just prepares us for what's next.
It's good to go down memory lane. It reminds you of why you do what you do. Because there's been some hard days and dark days and difficult seasons, but when you think about all the lives that have been changed, marriages restored, people rescued from addictions, it's worth it. All of it's worth it.
We actually had grown to a place where we needed more space, and we had caught wind that Blockbuster was going out of business, and so reached out to the real estate agent. Hey, we want that space. And so he said, all right, make an offer. And so we met for lunch, and I said, what's going on? He said, well, talk to Mark, and he doesn't want to negotiate anymore about Blockbuster, and he doesn't want to renew the lease. He wants you guys out when your lease is up. I was like floored. I was like, what? What's going on right now? I mean, we went from adding space to renewing the lease to I want you out in a year. And I mean, that just sent us into panic. But at the same time, out of panic, we saw God's provision. We just started praying and fasting and believing, and went into a series called The Future Is Now, Right Now. So we just told the church, like, we need $1.5 million in the plate, not in pledges, but in the plate. And we're taking up an offering in 4 weeks. Guy called me up, hey, let's go to lunch. Went to lunch. And after lunch, he came and pulled across the street where the kids' area is now, had his vehicle pointed at this property. And he said, what do you think about that? About that property? I said, oh. I said, how much does it cost? He said, I'm going to ask you one more time. And I thought, okay, I'm finally picking up what you're laying down. I said, I think it's amazing property. It would be perfect for the church. He said, awesome. I'll have it to you in the next 7 to 10 days. We find out this guy's donating these 40 acres to the church, which is one of the prayers that we're praying for. And it's the 3rd week of the series, and I'll never forget this. I'm preaching, I'm telling the people, hey, we're coming back next week. Next week is the week that we're going to take up the offering. And in my mind, I'm thinking there's no way we can raise $1.5 million. That's impossible with the amount of people that's coming through our doors. But I had the faith that it could happen, but I don't know if I truly believed it. I wanted to believe it. But the day that we gathered together, I preached, we took up the offering. It was an incredible day. And I'll never forget standing outside, greeting people. a gentleman who was there for the first time introduced himself, handed me his card, and said, "Whatever you're short, I'll make up the difference." And he walked away.
And then the next Sunday, we had set aside as kind of that celebration to announce the number to everybody and let everybody else know what that would look like.
A revolutionary movement of God always demands a revolutionary sacrifice. And your one-time sacrificial gifts, be thankful for what God has done, total $710,670. Isn't that awesome? That's not the truth. You have to multiply that times 2. $1,421,340.
I wouldn't want to celebrate 15 years without celebrating Shay Sellers.
Billy Burbank, Lee Lewis, and Shay were all part of my leadership team here at the Journey Church. And I remember early on, all of us sitting around a table, when the church was running 100 people, and Shay believing that one day the church would be thousands. And he had that vision, the same vision that we have here at the Journey Church, of reaching people who don't know Christ, as his legacy lives. Every time people walk through the doors of this new church, they will see the Shay Sellers Auditorium as they walk in and out of this building, in honor of his life and his commitment to the Journey Church.
The purpose behind the floor signing was twofold. First, it was to get our people here to see it, to touch it, to feel it, to know where we were going, and that this building would be just like the last building, just a vehicle to use for ministry, to reach more people. But I wanted that to be personal for everyone, and I wanted them to be able to come and write names on the floor of people that need Christ, marriages that need to be restored, friends and family, co-workers who have addictions that you're praying for.
It's one of those memorial things that, and you would hear people say, I sit in this spot in this building because this is where I wrote my loved one's name.
Walking around and just seeing people praying over what they wrote on the floor, and the tears. That's really what I remember more than anything, is just the emotions of that day.
That it's about people, not about a building, and the stories of over the years of Mama wrote my child's name, or my mother's name, or our marriage, just God answering those prayers and being able to see that and be a part of it.
Right behind me, I was with my 4-year-old granddaughter, and her parents were separated. And she came and she says, "Mimi, can we just put my parents' name down on here for them to get back together and their marriage to be healed?" And God did it.
I happened to write down my stepmom's name, and she got cancer. And I remember going up there for a visit. She told me, she sealed her salvation, but she said, "Kim, it is just crazy how God gave me the worst thing in my life to draw me close to Him." So her name is right over there not 5 feet from where I am.
We came across some research that said 80% of your people come from within a 5-mile radius. And we looked at our numbers and what we could research, and that proved to be true.
A lot of people would visit from the west side of the county, but not a lot of people stuck. We still were getting people from the island, but when we moved from the island to here and a lot of people didn't come with us, that was an eye-opener. And so we knew we, one, wanted to get back where we started, and we knew we needed another location on the west side of the county.
And so fast forward to August 8th of 2018, we launched the Journey West campus, and it's been this beautiful thing to watch, to see people that are driving from Folkestone and from St. Mary's and from other areas that aren't central to the west side of that county, but are coming even further than that just because they want to be a part of what we're doing out there, and to hear the stories about how lives are being changed and how God is using the church already to impact people. It's been an incredible thing to just kind of see a glimpse into what God has in store for that side of the county.
So man, the Island campus started January 2022, but it was crazy trying to get back there. Like, we looked at so many different buildings. We looked at purchasing, we looked at renting, we looked at going to the city, and then finally got open the door at Fernandina Beach Middle School. And one of the coolest parts about our campus that makes us so unique is that we're portable. And that, man, people just show up every single week at like 6:30 in the morning, 7 in the morning to set up this church and tear it all down in one setting. It's so unique and so, well, frankly, it's a miracle every time we have church on Sunday, because some of the things we have to do and some of the fun that we have to have, but it's incredible.
As a church, our prayer and goal was to make sure that we reach the entire county of Nassau, and and so Bill Kamai, who actually walked through our doors, gave his life to Christ, and just you could see Jesus all over him, and he just threw himself into ministry and on this team and that team, and I mean, it was just evident that there was a call on his life, and so our thought was to plant one in Jacksonville, and we talked to Bill and Krista about that, and they prayed about it, and certainly he felt, yes, I want to do this. I feel called to ministry. I want to be a part of the Journey Church. But then several months later, he came to me and said, what about Michigan? And what about Michigan? He said, well, that's where I'm from, and I feel like God's calling me home. And I said, let me think about that. And God just told me, hey, it's Bill, not a location. And so I just said, hey, I'm with you. I feel God's hand is on you. So if it's Livonia, then it's Livonia. It wasn't more about a location than it was what God was doing in him. And so out of Livonia, Scott and Kelly actually moved back to where they were from, Columbia, Tennessee, and planted another Journey Church. And that's just the beauty of how God works. Like, we're thinking Jacksonville, and Bill's thinking home, and he moves there, plants a church. This guy walks through his building and then goes back home and plants another Journey Church. And so here we are 15 years later, and we've got 5 different locations, 3 here in Nassau County, and 1 in Columbia, Tennessee, and 1 in Livonia, Michigan. But Bill has now passed the baton to Randy Bragg, who is just a great guy, and he was Bill's executive for a few years, and is just doing a tremendous job.
I think that we just keep growing as we're growing as a church, that we keep reaching the community and touching people's lives, and that we never lose our focus to where God wants us to be, and we're not where man wants us to be, but where God wants us to be. As long as we keep our focus where Jesus wants to be at, I think we're going to be just fine.
But I think we're going to be seeing so much more growth and so much stuff that he's going to do. It's just going to blow our mind. It's going to be amazing.
I think we're just now really at the beginning. I mean, I think God's got a lot more. To use y'all, to use the staff, to use the church, this church, or the people of this church, really, to show, especially this day and time. I think that we really need to, show who the church is and who God is.
There is going to be a great movement, and it's going to be to glorify God and to bring in more saints to the harvest. So yeah, I believe we are just getting started, and that just blows my mind because I see what has already happened.
15 years feels like a long time, but it's just the beginning. And now that I'm a mom, it's exciting for me to know that my daughter's going to get to grow up in church and experience what I experienced growing up being in church. And I loved it. I loved being at church all the time. I don't ever remember hating being here all the time. I love to be at church. I've always wanted to be here. So I'm just excited for Poppy to experience that.
I think for me, it just, it's a little bit surreal. It's crazy to think about, but I think it just also has given me a different appreciation and respect for my parents, and just the investment that they made in my life, even through starting a church from the ground up, which I know was probably very emotionally, mentally, and physically taxing. They were still very intentional to make sure that they were guiding us spiritually in our walk with Christ through all of it. And so it just gives me a new respect and appreciation for them and the investment they made in my life, and just makes me, kind of like Abby said earlier, just want to be very intentional to make sure that this is a place that Archie loves. Mm-hmm. And I never want it to be feel like an obligation, but I want it to feel like an honor.
15 years compared to the church is over 2,000 years old. You think about 15 years, it's a drop in the bucket as far as church life and history goes. But to see God's faithfulness over those years gives such courage and excitement for what's to come, in that we have grown in understanding what the church should look like, and our vision to be a church that looks like heaven. That the church is really battling a bad reputation right now, and as we keep walking out obedience to that vision, to be the church that God's called us to be a church that looks like heaven, we have an opportunity to present to the world what you're seeing in the media is not what's true. This is the church. This is who God's called us to be. And while it is challenging, it's exciting, and it's a calling that we all have to take seriously. So I think for me, we're just getting started is exciting, because our world desperately needs us to keep going.
For our celebration, we get to celebrate everything God's done in the past, but we can't become complacent. We can't allow ourselves to sit and just soak in everything God's done and not be the church. And so we are just getting started means there's so much more to do. There's people that still need Jesus. There's so many people who are hurting. COVID has just ravaged our world, and people are still, I feel, emotionally still dealing with the effects of that and all of the things that were lost. And so there's so much work to do, and we are just getting started, and I can't wait to see what God has next.